Hi, my name is Leigh. I live near Santa Cruz, California, and I'm going to tell you my story about being a survivor in more than one way. I grew up with divorced parents, and so I watched my mom go back to work and learn how to make ends meet. We didn't have a lot, but we got by. I grew up in Redwood City, went to high school in Redwood City, and I went to San Jose State for college because it was the closest college to home. I had a lot of anxiety growing up, and I chose that college specifically because it was basically close to home. But then at one point I asked my parents if I could possibly live in the dorms because I wanted to get over this anxiety that I had had all my life. So I moved into the dorms, and it really did solve my issues. I never had those again after I moved in. It solved everything. While I was at San Jose State, I got a job at Bank of the West, really close to school. I was a teller. I'd worked there for about a year. One day I went to work. It was in March of 1991. I was 20 years old, and it was a nice sunny March day. I set up my station, and about 15 minutes after I got into work, a man walked into the bank that looked different than our normal clientele. Where we were mainly in San Jose was mostly Hispanic clientele, and we had a lot of the same regulars come through all the time. This man I had never seen before. He had a trench coat on. He was a black man, and it was a warm day. So like the jacket didn't make sense. He came to my window, and I just had a bad feeling that something bad was about to happen. He pulled out a paper bag. It was folded up. He pushed it towards me. Still that gut feeling something's very wrong. And the next thing I knew is that he pulled out a gun. It was a silver handgun and pointed it at me and told me to give him all of my money. So I stepped up out of my chair. We were in these like high kind of chairs, and I faced my till, which made me turn my left side of my body. You know, he was facing the left side of my body. I went to put my key in the drawer, and when my key went in the drawer, I heard a pop behind me that sounded like a balloon had popped somewhere up in the ceiling way above me. And although I knew I was being robbed and there was a gun pointed at me, I didn't put two and two together in that moment until I felt my hand hurt. It was hurting so bad, and I looked down and I had two fresh bullet holes in my wrist. At that point, it was just two red holes. And it's the weirdest thing to look at something and see an injury in your body and not have seen how it happened at all, except I know that there's a gun pointed at me. And then the blood started to come out. What had happened is it hit a nerve in my hand, so my hand was just aching. It feels like if you put your hand in a bucket of ice water and you can't take it out. Like, that's the pain that I felt. So he just told me to be calm. He just said to continue to give him the money. And so I kept putting money on the counter. I was getting blood all over the money. Other tellers were handing him money as well. And he finally filled up his bag and walked out on foot. We shut the door. There happened to be a doctor in there because we were right next to San Jose Medical Center. And there was a nurse in there as well, crazy enough. One was getting a loan and one was just using the ATM. So I had medical assistance immediately. I was taken, they laid me down behind the counter. They called the ambulance, they called the police, obviously. And when the ambulance got there, the paramedics, they started to cut my clothes off, and they found out that the bullet had actually, when it came out of my wrist, it had gone into my chest as well, and then came out underneath my arm. So they found the bullet on the floor. And thank God that when it went through my chest, it just chipped a rib. It didn't do any other damage, thank God, because if it had hit my lung, I would have been in big trouble. To me, it was just more crazy. I didn't have any kind of residual PTSD because it wasn't like it was personal. He wasn't coming there to shoot me. To me, I felt like it had to have been an accident. I was doing everything he was asking. So if anything, it was more that something freak can happen at any second that you aren't planning on, that's going to happen, and you don't know how you're going to react until it happens. And in that moment, I mean, it is a survival mode that you go into, and you know that you just, like, there was no crying. I didn't pass out. I was quiet. I mean, I was answering questions to the paramedics. I mean, I was in pain, but you're trying to wrap your brain around what just happened. You just went to work. I just went to work. That was it. They caught him about 5 months later. He'd robbed a bunch of banks from San Jose to San Francisco. They finally caught him in San Francisco at the Bank of Canton. And by that point, he had gotten more brave and taken people hostage on the roof. And they brought him down. I got to go pick him out in a lineup months later, and he spent about 27 years in prison for the bank robberies, not my shooting. They asked me about it before, like that day of the sentencing. The FBI had me up in the room in San Francisco, and they said, look, this is what's happening. They asked me if I was okay with it, and I said, yeah, I'm fine. So the judge was aware of how this was all going down, obviously, because she was giving the sentence. And so to give me some justice, she made sure that he knew. This was during the sentencing. She said, the woman that you shot in San Jose is in this courtroom today. She goes, I want you to turn around and tell her you're sorry. And just froze. I had no idea she was going to do that. And he turned around and he looked around, and the whole courtroom was just dead silent. And there was all these other tellers there because they had been robbed by him as well. I was the only one that got shot. And I was sitting there in between my boyfriend and my mom, and I remember just being like, I couldn't even acknowledge that he said sorry. I couldn't move. I just froze. It's weird. It made me want to reach out to him later and tell him that I was okay. And I just always wanted to know why he did it. That's the one question that I'll never know the answer to. The backstory to my kid's dad. So yeah, we met when I was about 25, and yeah, I mean, it was everyone that I knew was getting married. This was the guy that was gonna give me the fairy tale, and I know he really wanted to. I know that that was his intention, but he had a big secret that I wasn't completely aware of until it was kind of too late. We'd already started having kids. He was and not just, I mean, I don't know if there's different levels, but it was acute. It became, by the time I got counseling for it and we had 3 kids, the things that were happening, just the shakiness, wetting himself, like coming home from work, and he'd wet himself, like driving home from work. Like that's how inebriated he was. And it felt like having a monster coming home. I used to feel like this huge sense of relief when he would leave in the morning. He worked construction. I'd watch his white truck leave the driveway, and I just felt like I can breathe. I can take care of the kids. I can be the mom I want to be. And then the second I'd see that white truck roll up, it was like, I have to be in protection mode of my kids. I don't want them to be aware of what's going on. I didn't know whether he'd be drinking or not. He always denied it. And then I would try to like find the evidence and then confront him with it. We'd go through, the counselors told me this, that there's like you go through, you hate them, you want to end everything, and then they're sorry. There's like a honeymoon period and you start to kind of like let it go because it's like, oh, okay, I guess it's going to be okay. And then it happens again. So we'd go through this cycle all the time. And my mom got tired of hearing about it. I know she wanted me to leave. And then I just, for a long time, chose not to tell anybody what was going on. And I kind of like in my mind made myself a promise that by the time the kids were in high school, I would go, because it was too much. Because my fear was him having any kind of custody of the kid. He didn't know how to take care of them, and I couldn't trust him because he was the kind that would pass out. He was not himself. He was like a completely different person. And I didn't know where the person that I knew went when he drank. He was just gone. It got to a point after my son was born, it was just becoming a constant habit. Sometimes there were stretches of like 6 months at a time where I didn't feel like anything was happening, and it was like, okay, good, we're on a good track. And that is why we had our 3rd kid, because I thought things were going well. And then it all started happening again after my son was born. And that first year of his life was really, really hard. I just decided it was right. Was about to turn 1. He had just turned 1. And I remember asking a friend in the neighborhood while my ex was at work if she could watch my kids, my 2 daughters, while I went down to the courthouse with my son in a stroller, and I filed for a restraining order and I filed for divorce. And sadly, we went on a trip to Disneyland that he was supposed to go on with to meet my parents and everything. And obviously he wasn't going because at that point we were living in 2 parts of the house. He knew things were not good. And I didn't mean to, but he was served with his papers on Father's Day while we were gone, and I had no idea if I was going to come home to an empty house. I didn't know what his family would do in retaliation. It was really a scary time. And so yeah, we went through the process of divorcing and separating, and the police had to escort him out. Finally, that was how he finally got out, and had a big confrontation with his family in front of my house, and the police took him away, or he was taken away. The police said he needed to leave, and his family took him. And anyways, we had to go through custody. There was no proof of his There was no DUIs, so it was my word against his. Unfortunately, they gave him 35% custody. There was nothing I could do about that. And so for a year and a half, my kids were basically placed in his hands. I put in a car seat and watched him drive off with a hardcore. It was terrifying. And was only a year old. He did end up dating somebody, which I was so thankful for, because there was a woman there and I knew that my kids were somewhat, being watched when she was there. But we had a stipulation in our agreement that if I had any suspicion that he'd been drinking while he had the kids, he would have to submit to a litmus test. Just put it on his tongue. If he didn't submit to it, and I couldn't take advantage of this privilege. And he agreed to it. He said, yep, that's fine. He wanted to prove to everybody that it was all me. I was making this all up. So they had this in the agreement. And I used it on two separate occasions. They said if he refused to take the test, then it was considered a dirty test. So the two times that it happened, I was certain he was drinking and he had the kids, and he lost full custody. I started dating. I went on Match. That was the dating app at the time. Met one person on there. We dated for about 4 months. And then ironically, it had nothing to do with a dating app. I met the person that I'm going to talk about. I met him on the beach close here where I live. And it was just an immediate, like, I noticed him, he was with another group, and my friends were like, he's looking at you. And this is like, it's the guy that I would never have had in high school. It was like the captain of the football team. And he had recently been divorced as well. So he's going through a divorce. We'd both been divorced for about a year. His story is different than mine. And he had 4 kids. I had 3. He was from the area I lived in, but he currently was living down south, closer to LA. And he was like, you should come down and visit. So I did. It became like this obsession. It was like Brad Pitt was calling whenever he called. I couldn't believe this guy liked me, but he didn't want a girlfriend. He was very specific about that. He had too many other issues right now. He didn't want a girlfriend, and there was some other girl that was kind of floating around. So, after I don't know, 5 months of having fun with that, I finally decided that needed to end. We went our separate ways. I ended up dating somebody else for about 2.5 years, and then he filtered back into my life just at the end of 2012 and said, I found you on Facebook again, and man, you look great. I've missed you, and we got to talking, and he said, I know I always told you I didn't want a relationship, but I'd really love to see if that could work now. I'm in a totally different place in my life. I'm really like wanting that, and you just look amazing, and I really missed an opportunity with you earlier. And I was hesitant because I didn't know how much I trusted him. He was somebody that seemed to think like he's always looking for the easy route in making money and never really trying to do the hard work. And so he's always looking for the quick fix, and he's always failing. And I ended up having to help him financially even back then. And I was like weary of like, is he back on his feet? Is he in a good place? So we met up, and before you know it, it wasn't even 2 weeks later, he sweet talked me into living with me in my house with my kids. And, he was going to become a realtor in the area. He was leaving his parents' house. He's like, hey, if we want to see each other, this is the best way to do it. Because currently he had been living at his parents' house about 4 hours away. He said, I could be there close to you. We could go to the beach. We can surf together. We can do this. He just laid it all out. This perfect plan. And if I become a realtor, we're going to have lots of money. We can even move out of the house you're in. I remember him promising the kids a hot tub and all this. Anyways, he ends up being with me for about 8 months. And by the 8th month, even before that, I think my oldest was about 12 at the time. I went to her school for some back to school night thing. It was August. And she told him off. She went into my room. He was on my bed on his computer. And she said, you are using my mom. You're eating here for free. You're living here for free. You're a loser. You need to get out. I could not believe it. And part of me was relieved because I was feeling the stress of him being here. Like he owned my house kind of. And anyways, he left. My 12-year-old really made him feel stupid. So he left, and it was pretty much the end of it. We needed to break up. Things weren't going great. So we break up. About 2 months later, I saw him to bring him some stuff, and he had not been feeling good. While we dated, he had some like intestinal issues. He was always having like diarrhea. And I just thought he was kind of a baby. Like he seemed like a hypochondriac. He really is like a hypochondriac. So, and then he had a cough all the time. Like there was always this cough. And so I didn't think much of it. He thought he had bronchitis. We never had it checked out. And so about 2 months later, I bring him his stuff, and he's sick. He's really sick. He says, Leigh, I'm just not doing well. I've been really not feeling well. I can barely even get out of bed. And I'm like, oh, well, you should go to the doctor, see what's going on. That's the last I hear from him. I end up going on with my life. I meet a man. I'm just dating and stuff. And about 2015, very beginning of 2015, I meet a man from Montreal who's doing a local surf trip in a van here locally where I live. And we meet up. We date all through 2015. He goes back and forth between Montreal, and it's very exciting. It's a man from another country. I'm like head over heels in love with him. And he was like, well, the best plan would be for me to be there during the winter, and then I'll go back home during the summer because he had his own business, and when it snowed where he lived, there was no work. So he came back during the winter of 2015. We were going through the winter, and I'm just not feeling good. And I don't know, I'm like, he's got me surfing. It's cold out. I'm like, I don't know if it's just a cold. I don't know, but I'm feeling not very good most of the time. I'm trying to ignore it. He's telling me you're fine. I remember going to a show up in San Francisco and smiling for pictures and stuff, but feeling this nagging, I don't feel good. Like I just feel not good. And I remember not wanting to get a drink there. I remember thinking like, that doesn't even sound good. I don't want to drink. Like I don't want any. I don't feel good. So I went to what we have here is a doctors on duty. That's what I have with my insurance. And it's, you don't see the same doctor every time. You see whoever's available. And I had gone in 3 different times within 3 weeks because I just wasn't getting better. And I felt so cruddy, just like virally cruddy, like a flu. So by the 3rd visit, I told them at doctors on duty, because they just kept saying, it's viral, just take ibuprofen, drink lots of fluids, it'll go away. I said, okay. So by the 3rd visit, I said, look, I have a fever now, and I didn't have that before, and I'm drenched in the middle of the night. I'm like, I've got these like night sweats. I'm like, maybe that's my body regulating the fever. I don't really know, but I'm not feeling better. I mean, it seems like it's getting a little bit worse. So then they seem concerned, and they're like, they do blood work, just regular blood work, and it comes back abnormal. And it was for I believe it wasn't my white cells, which everyone would think it would be. I think it was my red cells. It said abnormal. So they said, we're going to send you to an internal medicine doctor right now. And we don't know what's going on. So they send me to the hospital where this doctor has an office, and he goes down a list of, we're going to test you for everything because we need to get to the bottom of this. And when they took my blood, I saw all of these vials after vial after vial. I was like, my God. And so I surf, and like I said, my boyfriend had been, having me afterward go surf in the cold ocean, and it's winter, and I'm thinking, I know I'd been smacked in the face recently by a wave, and I swallowed water, and I thought maybe I swallowed a parasite because the water was all churned up from storms recently and stuff. And I thought that's probably what it is. It's like some parasite, and then they're gonna figure out what it is and give me the right medication, and it'll be fine. My worst thought is that it's cancer. I mean, maybe it's lupus. I don't know. I had no idea. So he goes down the list of everything that he is going to test me for. And one of the questions was, can I test you for HIV? And it was like, yeah, just test me for everything. That went in this ear and came out the other, never thought of it again. I went home, and about 4 hours later, the phone rang, and it was that doctor, and he sounded nervous. And the doctor tells me, I don't really know how to tell you this, but you tested positive for the HIV antibody. And I just remember in that moment, it was like my world just stopped. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't normally get emotional. I remember thinking that my mom can't fix this. This is like, I've done something really bad, because why else would this happen? I must have really, really screwed up. And I knew I'd been dating, and I wasn't always careful about, being protected. And I was like, wow, I'm like the single mom with 3 kids in this neighborhood, and I have HIV. I mean, and I know my boyfriend at the moment, well, I'll tell you what his reaction was. I just knew right then that this was true. So I got off the phone with him with 0 instructions on what the next steps were. Had no clue. And at that point, I was on my couch sick and looked at my boyfriend and thought, well, that's going to end, because clearly I'm gross now. He'll never find me attractive again. And oh my God, am I going to be able to take care of my kids? It's hard because I just know that everybody that is diagnosed goes through these same thoughts, and it's universal. But I thought of my kids right away, like, will I be able to take care of them? Like, how long do I have to live? And I really messed up, and I didn't want to, all I wanted to do was protect my kids. And now I'm a freaking old. Like, it's like, this is what I am now. I did too many things with too many people, and this is what you get for doing that. And I live in a nice neighborhood, my kids are involved with nice things, and now mom is this disgusting who has HIV. So those are all the initial thoughts that go through your head. And my God, is there even a doctor nearby? I'm gonna have to drive hours to see somebody. Will I lose everything because I can't afford medication? Like, what is it today? I have no idea of anything. So my daughter comes down, my 15-year-old at the time, and gets her phone. I was so sick, I could not even lift my phone up I could lift my phone up, but I couldn't open it up to see any more information. I couldn't take it. I didn't want to know any more bad news. So she looks up HIV, and by the way, the boyfriend looks shocked. He is thinking that he gave it to me because he had strep throat a year prior before he met me, and now was wondering if that was HIV, and he didn't know it. We learned a lot about transmission and what is high risk and what is not through this process, but he tested the next morning, he was negative. He had been exposed to me for an entire year and was negative, and I talk about that a lot in my advocacy. So my daughter looks up on her phone and sees that, Mom, it looks like people don't die from this today. Like, And I always think, like, my daughter, my freaking 15-year-old is the one who got that guy out of the house. She's the one sitting there looking up this diagnosis for me. She's so strong. We find out that, yeah, you can survive this today. There's medication, there's treatment. So I go and see a doctor the next day, and it's a infectious disease doctor associated with the same doctor who I just saw. He's in the same office, but he's not an HIV specialist. So I go into the office. It's a warm day. He did tell me, look, this is super manageable. It's like diabetes today. It's nothing. It's easier than diabetes. You just take treatment, you become, undetectable after time, and that's it. We're going to put you on this one medication. Everything's going to be fine, basically. And so I'm like, okay. And, like I said, I didn't feel great, but I could get myself to that office because I needed to see what it all meant. So days are going by. I'm taking this medication that's outdated. He didn't even give me anything that was current. It had super bad side effects. I felt like I was, I don't even know, like I was in a box almost, and like my head's pounding, and it was crazy. It had attacked my immune system clearly, but he didn't test me for that. So I didn't know what it was until like another week later when I finally saw an HIV specialist. Little did I know I had AIDS at that point, which means that my CD4 count was under 200. Anything under 200 is considered an AIDS diagnosis. And if you have an AIDS defining illness, and I didn't know it at the moment, but 2 days later I was diagnosed with pneumonia. And I remember being in my house. Now I've got HIV. I know that. I'm not happy about it. I still feel like I haven't seen an HIV specialist yet. I'm still trying to figure all these things out. I'm taking medication in secret because I don't want my boyfriend to see me, because it just shows that I have HIV. And he also wasn't 100% sure that I had it. He didn't want to believe it. So he thought maybe there's still a chance that you don't. I was kind of navigating a lot of this on my own. My boyfriend wasn't all that interested in being at my side during any of this, only when I finally saw my HIV specialist just to find out what his risk was at that point as far as like any further transmission risk. I go to the ER 2 times. One time because I'm having like a panic attack because I'm HIV positive and I have no information from anybody, and I'm like, I can't even sleep at night. I don't even know what's going on. They could do nothing for me. They looked at me like I had 3 heads. I don't know what you want us to do for you. So they released me. And then about 2 days later, I went to another ER in Santa Cruz because I couldn't breathe. So I remember going upstairs. I was on the phone with my friend, and I walked upstairs and I just plopped back on my bed and I said, I can't catch my breath. And I said, but it's probably nothing. And then it happened fast. It didn't even, like a day later, I was like, wow, I can barely breathe. It just felt like breathing was becoming arduous. So I went to the ER. I'll never forget it. The nurse there was so kind. I had to walk up and tell them that I was just diagnosed with HIV. Again, this is all, every time you say it, you can't believe you're saying it. This is not, I'm 45 years old. I never expected that I would have HIV in my life. And now I'm having to introduce myself. Hi, I have HIV. This is not fun. It's really the worst, honestly. So she takes me behind a counter, is triaging me, and there's these 2 paramedics that are behind the counter, and they're kind of having a conversation. Their backs are to us, but they were right there, and all of a sudden, she protected me. I'll never forget it. In fact, I've tried to find her and I couldn't, but she said, excuse me, could you guys please go over there and have your conversation and give us some privacy? And I know she did that because of my diagnosis. And I felt totally protected. I did all the testing. Yeah, I had pneumonia. So I finally saw an HIV specialist about 4 days later. And I finally got on the right treatment. It took about 5 weeks to get everything figured out and get me over the pneumonia. They take you off the HIV treatment until it's called an ARV, an antiretroviral. They take you off that until the infections are gone from AIDS, basically from your immune system being so weak that your body just couldn't get anything, basically. So when the pneumonia started clearing up, I just took medicine prophylactically for another 2 months. But once I felt better, it was like, I always assumed I was going to feel sick forever. But going back, it took about 20 minutes after my diagnosis over the phone to figure out where this came from. And I thought about it and I was like, well, there's only one person that I know is high risk for HIV. I always knew what was high risk for HIV. I always knew it was men who had sex with men, bisexual men, or needle users. I knew that. And I'm not wrong. To this day, that is still what it is. So my girlfriend, I remember a girlfriend of mine saying back when I was Tinder dating and stuff, you should be careful. You never know. You could get HIV. I'm like, well, I'm not dating guys who are with other guys. Well, we don't really know where everybody's been. But yeah, this person had been with other men and he had been a past needle user. And I knew that going into seeing him again. But his words to me were that he was clean and that he had been tested and he had tested in long Long Beach and he was negative as far as he knew. And if I wanted him to test again, he would do it. This is in the beginning of our relationship, but he said I would need to pay for it because he had no money. And in my mind, I'm thinking that might be like $200. I was a single mom, barely making it. And I thought, well, I'm going to just take his word on this. He doesn't look like he has HIV. You can't see HIV, but I did not look at him and think HIV at all. So that was the end of that. I never thought of it again. So when the diagnosis came up, I'm like, oh my God, it's got to be him. So it took me some time going through Facebook. We'd blocked each other on stuff. So on social media, there was really just Facebook back then. I found a cousin of his that I'd gone to a wedding with him, to her wedding. And I said, look, has been sick? And she said he has. And so she thought, word was through the family that he had cancer. I couldn't get into his Facebook, so a girlfriend of mine found it and she took a picture, a screenshot, well, whatever. She took a picture and she sent it to me. I'm like, oh my God, it's him. He was emaciated in the picture. Not emaciated, but he did not look like himself. He was thin. He had lost weight. I'm like, it's him. It's him. It's him. That took a couple days to get all that figured out, and finally got a hold of him. And his mom was the one who called me, or I called and she answered. And the first thing she said was, we gave your name and number to the clinic as soon as he was diagnosed. And it was like she was concerned that I was gonna, I don't know, take legal action or something. It was a little weird. And because I'd always really liked his mom. So he and I got on the phone, we talked. He's like, yeah, it sounds like you have AIDS. And that was before my CD4 count came back. He's somebody who I've had conversations with since he was dealing with his own mortality when he was diagnosed. And he did what he was supposed to do in that moment. And it's the best way to do it. The health departments will get a hold of people that have been maybe exposed, and then they tell the people, you should test just in case because you've been exposed. So I never got that phone call for whatever reason. I don't know why. And my health department got a hold of, because I live in Santa Cruz County, he's in Sacramento County. That became a whole thing. They were bickering back and forth, but it didn't matter at that point because I had it. There was nothing they can do about it anymore. So what happened was I started getting better, and I started feeling like myself again, which I never ever imagined. I thought I was going to feel sick every day. I felt like it was part of the punishment. As I'm getting better, I remember having this little epiphany moment when I was walking my dog. I was like, I feel normal. What? I'd never expected this. So it got to this day where all of a sudden I felt normal. I think I would have never talked about it publicly. There's so many things that had to go the right way for me to talk about it publicly. I also had to get sick because I never would have felt like there was anything to talk about. If I got diagnosed right after I found out I had it, never felt almost deathly. To get better, to feel so normal again, like that to me was something that needed to be talked about. So just that. So people always get mad at the one who gave it to me, or I got it from him or whatever. They get mad and say, well, he should have contacted you, and I'm like, but do you get there's a silver lining to all this? Because he didn't contact me and I did get so sick, it made me go public, and I've helped so many people. I've had a very blessed life. Really, truly, it is what you make of it. But everything has always ended up, like my mom says, everything always goes the right way for you eventually.